بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
الحمد لله رب العالمين ثم الصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Okay, this is the second dars on usool al-thalatha. We still haven't started the book yet, and we're not going to start the book actually until next class, because we have to get through something that's very important before we start the book. And what that is we have to know about the author, because this author is a very controversial author, and we don't want to study this book halfway and then come to the conclusion that this guy's misguided and then all of our beliefs are messed up and that we have to start over with another person or something else. So we need to study his life to understand his validity, how much knowledge he has, if he's qualified, what exactly are the contents of his book, how much came from the Sunnah, how much came from the Qur'an, how much was new, what came from the ulama, and what are his positions. And one of the reasons that we need to study this man is because Rasulullah ﷺ spoke a lot about backbiting. We know the impermissibility of backbiting, and we know the incredible sins that you can gather just by saying a few things or making a few gestures. One time, Muhammad ﷺ, he was considering a woman named Safiya, radiyallahu ta'ala anha wa ardaha, may Allah be pleased with her, and Allah is pleased with her. He was considering this woman Safiya for marriage. And so he asked Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, what do you think of Safiya? And Aisha didn't have anything bad to say. What she did was she just gestured that Safiya is a little short. She just did a gesture, just moving her hand a little bit. And Muhammad ﷺ said to this, that if you took that gesture, just that, and you put it in the ocean, it would change the color of the ocean. That's how intense just that little thing is. Let alone people who spend hours upon hours slandering people who are dead, who are maybe even martyrs, shuhada. But that's another story. Allah said about the flesh of a Muslim, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم.
يا أيها الذين آمنوا اجتنبوا كثيرا من الظن إن بعض الظن إثم ولا تجسسوا ولا يغتب بعضكم بعضا أيحب أحدكم أن يأكل لحم أخيه ميتا فكرهتموه واتقوا الله إن الله تواب رحيم.
This is Surah Hujurat, which is the 49th Surah, ayah number 11. And in English, O you who have given yourself to conviction, avoid negative assumption. Indeed, some assumption is sin, and do not spy or backbite each other. Would one of you like to eat the flesh of his dead brother? Indeed, you would detest it. And fear Allah, because Allah is accepting of repentance and the most merciful. So, Allah compared talking to someone behind their back as eating their dead flesh. He compared it literally to cannibalism. Eating somebody who is dead. And so we have a duty when anybody is slandered, be it the mujahideen, be it any Muslim, your mother, your friend, even if you don't like them, even if you have a conflict with them. It's obligatory upon you to defend them. And nowadays, it's actually somewhat of an honor to be attacked by certain people. If certain people backbite you and insult you, it kind of makes you feel happy. Because these guys are so misguided. If they're talking about you, that you're on the truth. But even though that's true, if you notice that happening to another Muslim brother, you're still obligated to defend them. And Rasulullah ﷺ said in a rigorously authentic narration that whosoever turns away bad talk from his brother. So for example, let's say Zayd goes to the bathroom and then Ilyas starts calling him ugly. If one of us tells Ilyas, shut up, then we fall into this category. The one who turns away bad talk of his brother, Allah made it a haqq upon himself. He enforced it upon himself to free that person from the hellfire. So if you defend the honor of your brother, when they're not there, Allah has obligated himself to free you from the hellfire as long as you die as a Muslim. That being said, we know Ibn Abdul-Wahab, Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab, rahimahullah, may Allah have mercy upon him, he's constantly slandered. You hear the term Wahhabi. Just to say that, some people are intending to slander him. And he doesn't need us to defend him. He really doesn't need us, because Allah has already preserved his books and gave him hundreds of thousands of followers. So he doesn't need us to defend him. And he gets reward when these people slander him. Rather, it's us that need to defend him for our own benefit, to go to Jannah and to get the reward of defending him, and so we don't get sins. Because we know that if you allow something to happen Islamically, that's considered doing something. If you see somebody beating somebody else up and you have the power to change it but you don't do anything, you are actually taking a part of that abuse. And similarly, when we look at the Sunnah, sometimes Muhammad ﷺ didn't say to do something, but he also didn't discourage it. He saw somebody doing something and he didn't discourage it. That thing that he didn't discourage actually becomes a Sunnah instantly. So if Muhammad ﷺ saw something happening and he didn't say anything, don't do it, that makes it a Sunnah, because he allowed it. And in Islam, we enjoin in the good and we forbid in the evil. So when we hear about Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab and people speak about him, do we need to defend him? He is one of the most hated people in the last 2 centuries by the innovators and the deviants and the modernists and the misguided from the Sufis. His full name is Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab ibn Sulayman al-Tamimi. Muhammad, the son of Abdul-Wahab, the son of Sulayman, from the tribe of Tamim. And he is from the Arabian Peninsula. In a way, he's similar to a man known as Nur ad-Din Zingi, but we'll discuss him another time, inshallah. He was one of the people around the time of Salahuddin who helped to unify the ummah, and we'll discuss comparisons a little bit later in the halaqah. And what Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab did is not special. Really, any one of us here could do it. Even that little kid right there lying down, not paying attention, he has the capacity to do what Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab did. And even this halaqat that we're holding is similar to what Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab did. So who is he? When was he born? Was he a Sahabi? Was he a Tabi? Was he from the Salaf? He was only born about 250 years ago, which is 1115 Hijri. Write down the year. What year? 1115 after the Hijrah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. 1115. 1115. So he's not a Sahabi and he's not a Tabi'i. So we can't say, oh, he was really pious, he saw the Prophet, he saw the Sahaba. We can't say that he had some kind of incredible influence to cause him to do what he did. In fact, his great-grandchildren are still alive today, and you can track his lineage, and we know of them, and we know who they are. So in the area where he was living in the Arabian Peninsula, which is where Muhammad ﷺ began his dawah, there was actually quite a bit of shirk. What they would have is they would have graves. And what they would do over the graves is they would build these domes. And what they would do with these domes is they would actually worship the person in the grave, and they would make tawaf around the grave the same way that we make tawaf around the Kaaba. Wa iyadu billah. And that is shirk, that is kufr, that's disbelief. And we'll discuss why later in the class. And this was just like Quraysh was doing before Islam. So if a woman couldn't get pregnant, for example, what she would do is she would go to this tree in the Arabian Peninsula and she would make dua to this tree. These are people who call themselves Muslim. They go and they can't get pregnant, and then they go and they make dua to a tree and they worship a tree so that they can get pregnant. And similarly, if a man couldn't get a wife, he would go make dua to the dead in order to help him find a wife. And this escalated to the point where they had the graves of the Sahaba, the companions of Rasulullah, and they were even worshipping some of the Sahaba. And if you look back to the story of Nuh alayhi salatu wasalam, this is exactly how shirk started at the time of Nuh. What would happen is a pious person would die. So they would say, let's remember this pious person. So they would make a painting or a picture. And then they would say, he deserves better and we want to remember him more. So maybe they make action figures. Or they go on to statues. And then these statues developed more and more, and eventually it reaches to a point where they started worshipping the pious people. And this, if you look historically at major world religions, this happens again and again. If you look at Christianity, what happened? Even if you look in the New Testament of the Bible, Isa alayhi salatu salam, he never says to worship me. Even when what they have that's corrupted now, yet they worship him. If you look at the Jews, they worship some of their prophets, even though the second most monotheistic book after the Qur'an is the Torah. If you look at Buddhism, Buddha himself said it doesn't matter whether God exists or not. It's an agnostic philosophy, right? Yet people worship Buddha, and they have statues of Buddha, and they pray to Buddha. And if you look at the Shia, Islam, the fundamental thing in Islam is Tawheed, which is why we're studying this book even. Yet they still found a way to idealize a pious person and worship him. Ali ibn Abi Talib radiyallahu ta'ala anhu wa ardah. So the same thing was happening in the Arabian Peninsula about 250 years ago. And it was also happening in Yemen, and it was in Iraq. In Iraq they're actually worshipping Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, the great scholar of Islamic jurisprudence of fiqh, and we'll discuss fiqh upcoming inshallah. The same thing we also find in Pakistan and in India. They were doing it in Egypt as well even. What they would do is they look at the statues of the pagans, you know, the Sphinx and the pyramids, and they're actually reviving the ancient Egyptian religion. These were Muslims, but they were so ignorant that they actually reverted to a religion that's been dead hundreds of years. And they didn't even know the hieroglyphic language at that point. The Rosetta Stone was not discovered. So Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab, he was from the Arabian Peninsula. And he learned first under his father, who was a big judge, a big qadi. And he lived in a town called Uyayna, in a place called Najd. Now, what some of the misguided people will say is, there's an authentic hadith in Bukhari from Muhammad ﷺ which says, Muhammad ﷺ was making dua for Sham. And Sham is greater Syria. Lebanon, Yemen, Lebanon, Palestine, Syria, parts of Iraq, Anbar. He was making dua for it. And then he made dua for Yemen. And so one of the people said, Ya Rasulullah, make dua for our Najd, which is in the Arabian Peninsula. And Rasulullah refused to make dua for Najd because he said the horn of shaitan will be from Najd. And then there's another hadith where a man told Rasulullah, referring to the war booty, he said, fear Allah and he said, be just. I'dal Rasulullah. And so Muhammad ﷺ said, how are you going to tell me to be just? I'm the most just. If you're doubting my justness, then who can be just? And of course, Umar ibn Abdul-Khattab was there. He said, Rasulullah, let me cut this guy's neck off, obviously. That's the way Umar ibn Khattab was, radiallahu anhu. But Rasulullah said no, because many people are like that. And that man was from the tribe of Tamim. So what the misguided people will do is, they want to refute Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab, because he refutes their disbelief, right? He says you can't worship the graves. So they want to refute him. So they say, look, he's from Najd, and he's from the tribe of Tamim. So we have to look at his life, and we have to see, does he fit into a category of a fitna?
So he learned first from his father in Uyayna in Najd, which is in the Arabian Peninsula. And he stuck firmly to knowledge, which is one of the best things you can do, is to just sit down and gain knowledge. The Muslims have always been academic. Even when many of them couldn't read, they were intense intellectuals. And the greatest geniuses of the world are the Muslim scholars. We even have scholars today who are nothing compared to the scholars of the past, and they memorized Bukhari and Ibn Majah and Tirmidhi and Muslim and 6 or 7 books of hadith, and then they memorize the Qur'an in 10 different qira'ah, and then they memorize books of fiqh. And this is today, let alone back when we had the greatest scholars. So we need to sit and get knowledge and have firm knowledge, and we should try to go to every class that we can. If there's a fiqh class, we should go to that class. If there's an aqeedah class, we should go to that class, because it's very important. And we'll discuss the reward of knowledge later on in the durus, inshallah. If we look at Bukhari, for example, Bukhari went from Sham, from Bukhara in outside Russia. He went to Sham, he went to Iraq, he went to the Arabian Peninsula, just to get knowledge. Yet we have brothers who can't make it 30 minutes on a Sunday afternoon to come and get a little bit of knowledge. So after he learned everything that his father had to teach him, he went to Mecca, and he learned all of the knowledge of all of the ulama in Mecca. And then from there he went to Medina, and he learned all of the knowledge of all the ulama in Medina. And then he went to Iraq and began his dawah in Iraq, just like Bukhari did. And a few people started following him, and a very small amount of righteous scholars started following him, because we talked about the widespread kufr and misguidance and shirk at that time. So a few scholars supported him. And the governors, the political rulers of the area, were upset with this, and they tried to kick him out. And in a lot of the areas that Ibn Abdul-Wahab was, the Khilafah, Islamic government, did not have control in a lot of those areas. So, instead of causing a problem, so the people call him a fitna, right? They say he caused problems. Instead of causing a problem, he just left. The governors didn't want him, he just left. And he went back to Saudi. And he went outside Uyayna, near Uyayna. He found that his father got in trouble in his hometown of Uyayna, so they're right outside of Uyayna. And he starts giving dawah again. He starts spreading Islam, the true Islam. The Islam that's based upon knowledge and understanding and proofs. And the governor there was neutral to his dawah. He didn't kick him out, he didn't oppress him, he didn't fight him. But he didn't necessarily support him extremely. So what happened was, some people attempted to kill Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab, rahimahullah, when he was outside of Uyayna. But he didn't fight them, he didn't wage jihad, even though he was allowed to at this point. All he did at this point was stop shirk and try to get people to worship Allah and to stick firm to Tawheed, but they still tried to kill him because of their attachment to disbelief. So, whilst there was a problem in their aqeedah, in their basic beliefs, in their Tawheed, there were other problems. There was rape, there was widespread pillaging. If you tried to go with your caravan out into the desert, it's very likely you're going to get attacked. There was a lot of societal problems. There was crimes, bandits. But he focused on the most important thing, which is aqeedah. And we'll discuss why aqeedah is more important than these other situations. So when people told him to get out, he got out. And he went to Uyayna. He went from outside Uyayna to Uyayna. And he met Uthman ibn Muhammad, the governor of the area. And this man said he would support Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab, and he would allow him to live there. And in this area, in Uyayna, now many people start supporting him, and many people are happy with the dawah. But there was a problem. The brother of Umar ibn Abi Khattab, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, Zayd ibn Khattab, radiyallahu anhu, his grave was being worshipped near the borders of Riyadh, which is in Saudi. So Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab saw that this was a big problem. They built a big memorial there over the grave, which is impermissible. If a grave is above waist height, it must be level. It doesn't matter whose grave it is, it has to be level. And they had a memorial in Mecca. In Mecca, around Khadija's grave, they had a kufr memorial where they were worshipping Khadija radiyallahu ta'ala anha. And so Uthman ibn Muhammad told Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab, if you try to destroy the shrine, the tribes around are going to rebel. So he was warning him. And we have to understand, it doesn't matter whose grave it is. Sahabi, even if it's a prophet. Even if a prophet has something haram on top of his grave, we have to destroy it. And this includes Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What you see now in Saudi, what they put on top of the grave is not permissible to have. We have technology. We can easily remove the grave, remove these things that are haram, and put the grave back. It's not a problem. And people are today committing kufr near the grave of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They'll write notes, making dua to Muhammad, and then they throw it over there. And they become kuffar right there. So, that needs to be demolished. And we don't do this because we hate Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We love him so much that his every word, we stick to it. And when he said level the grave, we level the grave. And when he told Ali ibn Abi Talib to level the graves, we follow Ali ibn Abi Talib. And when we look at Ibn Abdul-Wahab, rahimahullah, he didn't bring anything new. He wasn't one of those ulama that has a lot of eloquent statements that are quoted a lot. You don't see a lot of quotes of Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab, do you? You don't really see them floating around. All he did was he took Qur'an and Sunnah and the statements of the ulama, and he applied them practically. So when he went to go level the grave, and eventually Uthman ibn Muhammad, the governor, went behind him and he said, I'll support you. So the tribes gathered to fight Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab, but the governor got 600 men to defend him. And so the tribes backed off and they didn't want to fight. And the dawah of Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab, his spreading Islam, got even greater. So he returned to Uyayna, which is his hometown, to continue the dawah. And people from across the world came to study with him. We discussed last class how sometimes an alim is sincere and his dawah goes all across the world. Even back then when they didn't have internet and they didn't have postal systems, or at least American postal systems, still, people were coming from across the world to study with him. So a woman came to him and she said she committed zina. She committed adultery. And so Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab, he followed the sunnah. Because one time, a woman came to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and she said, I committed zina and I want to be punished. And we know the punish in Islamic law, if it's proven, is they get stoned to death if they're married. Lashing is if they're unmarried. And the wisdom behind this is that it deters people from doing it. And we all know the harms of zina, the spread of sexual diseases, the children who are without fathers and the psychological damage. Objectification of women. There's a lot of things. So this is mostly to warn people, don't do it. In Islamic history, nobody has ever been killed for zina unless they wanted to. The proof in order to be killed for zina is 4 righteous, well-known people have to see you doing the act of penetration without them spying on you. If they spy on you, they get in trouble. So you have to basically commit zina in public where anybody can see you and 4 righteous people see you and their stories match up. And even then the judge will tell them, don't testify. That has never happened. The only people that have gotten punished are people that wanted to. So this woman wanted expiation from her sin. And when a female sahabi did this, she came to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and she said, I want to be stoned. He said, are you crazy? Are you sure? He turned away from her multiple times, ignoring her. But when she was firm and she really wanted this, and she thought about it, then they agreed to it. And she has until the very last second, right until they start stoning her, to say, I don't want this. So the woman came to Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab, and he followed the sunnah, but in the end he had to stone her. And so he did it. And so even Uthman ibn Muhammad, he said, I can't support you anymore. And the reason why is because the governor in the next town next to Uyayna, he was sending Uthman ibn Muhammad some money. And he said, I'm not going to send you any more money until the man who executed this woman is killed. So Uthman ibn Muhammad respectfully told Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab to leave. And Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab obliged. So you see, he didn't cause any fitna. He just left. He applied Islam, and if the people didn't like it, he left. So he went to a nearby town and he stationed himself there. And the ruler of that town is Muhammad ibn Saud. That you recognize that name, Saudi Arabia. We'll discuss that. And he was a great grandfather of the corrupt Saudi rulers of today. Muhammad ibn Saud was not a corrupt man himself by any account that we have. However, his lineage is just corruptness upon corruptness, but we'll talk about that. So the moment Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab stepped in this town, Muhammad ibn Saud took him in. And the wife of al-Saud knew that Ibn Abdul-Wahab was a righteous guy, so she told her husband, take care of him and protect him so that people can benefit from him. And people again came across the world in order to study. And he was destroying the statues and establishing Islam. Al-Saud loved Wahhab so much, he loved Ibn Abdul-Wahab so much, he made him promise that Ibn Abdul-Wahab would not leave this town. And Ibn Abdul-Wahab agreed. Eventually, much later on, Saud died and his relatives supported Ibn Abdul-Wahab. And wherever they saw shirk, they destroyed statues, and it got that they started conquering towns, and their dawah is now spread worldwide. And Ibn Abdul-Wahab lived for 91 years, so he died 1,206 years after the hijrah of Muhammad ﷺ. And he didn't use jihad until way later. It wasn't until he died that Mecca was taken and then Taif was taken peacefully. Or Medina peacefully, and Taif was also taken. So now we're going to go through about 7 characteristics of his da'wah. We're going to break them down. So write these down, inshallah. Characteristic number 1 of his da'wah is you don't follow your mind, you follow the Qur'an and the Sunnah. You stick to the Qur'an and the Sunnah. Look at his most famous book, Kitab al-Tawheed. It doesn't even have an introduction. When one of us goes to write a book, what does he do? He writes a small introduction. You know, why am I writing this book? The purpose, the benefits. He didn't do that. All he did was he started with the ayah of Qur'an and then he started. And it's bab after bab, section after section. All of it is Qur'an, hadith, and the words of ulama. So if you want to really say Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab is a misguided guy, you actually have to condemn Ibn Taymiyyah, and Imam Shafi'i, and Imam Bukhari, and al-Dahabi, and you have to condemn Rasulullah ﷺ.
Why do they consider him?
The reason why people consider him misguided, there's 2 reasons. One is that they're entirely ignorant. If you notice in the Muslims today, look at the news. People say, these Muslims killed innocent people. Instantly we believe it. We don't think for a moment to consider, is this true? Do intelligent research and investigate. People hear he's misguided, or they hear he's extreme, and they're like, okay, the Wahabis are extreme, I'm not a part of them. Or some people say, you know, he refuted the misguided Sufis, for example. Some Sufis are upon true Islam, but some are misguided. And so what they'll say is, okay, remember the hadith I told you? He's from Najd, and he's from the tribe of Tamim, and there's like, okay, he's misguided. No proof, they just twist the sayings of Rasulullah just to fit their agenda. That's why. It's ignorance. So if you want to condemn him, you have to condemn the other ulama. He brought nothing new. He didn't issue a lot of his own statements. Sometimes he commented. Occasionally he would comment on a hadith of Qur'an, but if he did that, it was only something a different alim said before that. So why is he so popular? That's because he applied the text to reality. He went against the grain. At a time when everybody was doing kufr and shirk and misguidance, he stuck to the Qur'an, the Sunnah, and the words of the ulama. So much so that his dawah spread worldwide. And that's why we still study his books today, because of his strict adherence to Tawheed and his sincerity, rahimahullah. And his books are really simple. I know, inshallah, you're supposed to have read usool al-thalatha. I don't know if you actually did, but it's a very, very simple book. It's just Qur'an, a hadith, a couple quotes, Khalas, it's only 22 pages. It's so simple because the aqeedah is not that complex. Aqeedah comes from the word aqd. Aqd. Something that's tight, like a knot. So he wanted to show the ummah how simple aqeedah is. It's a skeleton that forms you. It's like the foundation of a house. We talked yesterday about usool. How usool are the principles that are underlying. That's what aqeedah is. Al-usool al-thalatha, your aqeedah, these are the things that you base your entire life on. The Qur'an and the Sunnah always go directly with the mind and the intellect. Anybody whose logic or the reason guides them away from Qur'an or Sunnah, they're being illogical, if you really think about it. Their fitra, their mind is tainted. Conflicts only arise when shaitan gives them waswasa. There is no atheist on this earth who can refute Islam. Number 2, his dawah was to everybody. It was to the cosmos, it was to the universe. It wasn't to one person, one group. He didn't go just to the Saudis, or just to the youth, or just to the women. It was to everybody. Nowadays, sometimes you don't want to go to the elders to give them dawah, because they honestly don't want to listen. You go to the youth. Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab went to everybody, even though he faced difficulties. But we also have to remember that the youth are special. Ibn Kathir said, we know that Musa alayhi salatu, only a few people believed in Musa, right? Ibn Kathir says in his tafsir that these few people were actually the youth in the area. Musa gave dawah to everybody, but the youth accepted. It's always the youth that revive Islam. The elders have the capacity to change. We shouldn't give up on giving dawah to our elders. However, it's much more difficult. And we know after a certain age, Allah withdraws tawbah from people who are a certain age. But the youth are often rebellious. They think and they refute and they research and they want to be critical, and they don't just believe what's handed down to them. And if you look in Surah Al-Kahf, you look at the youth who Allah literally changed the movement of the sun for them. Just for a couple of youth. There was a day of celebration in a town where they were worshipping idols, statues. And so these youth said, we don't find it reasonable that we worship statues. So while the leader was lining up the people to worship them, they snuck out. And they went to this cave. And Allah honored them so much, just these teenagers. He honored them so much that their dog is mentioned in the Qur'an. Allah loved them so much that a dog that just happened to be with them is mentioned in the Qur'an. And these were the youth. And another story of the youth is a boy who came after Isa alayhi, but before Muhammad sallallahu, the 13-year-old boy. And he was against the entire world. He was upon Tawheed when everybody else was upon kufr. So he caused problems. So what the king said, this is the story of the king and the boy. The king said, kill this boy. They took him onto a ship and they tried to throw him off. But the waves changed and it threw everybody off except for him. And he sailed back to shore. So the king tried to kill him again. They went to a tall mountain and they tried to throw him off. But it didn't work either time. And so eventually, the king got tired. And the boy said, if you want to kill me, I'll tell you how to kill me. This is the only way that you can kill me. He said, get an arrow out of my bag. Point it and shoot me in between the eyes and say Bismillah. The only way you can kill me is if you say Bismillah. So the king did this. And the boy was killed. And everybody saw this. Because the boy said, gather everybody so they can see it. And the moment they saw that only in the name of Allah could he die, everybody became Muslim. So the king started killing them. And this is one of the few times when Allah made a child speak, because there was a pit where the king was throwing all the people who just became Muslim. And there was a woman holding her baby, and she didn't know what to do. She could stay or become non-Muslim, or go and die with her child. And then Allah made the child speak, and He encouraged her to jump in the fire and to go to Jannah. So, people claim Ibn Abdul-Wahab is extreme, and he's a takfiri, and he casts people outside the fold of Islam, right? So there's multiple schools of Islamic aqeedah. I will discuss this later. But one of them is the Ash'ari. And many people consider them to be misguided. However, one of these shuyukh, Ash'ari shuyukh, the biggest one, visited Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab. And he opened Sahih al-Bukhari. And he read a statement that showed that this Ash'ari shaykh, he loved the truth. And eventually this man wrote a long letter trying to refute Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab. And Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab wrote another letter refuting him. But what Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab wrote in his letter was, he said, Wallahi, in every salah I make dua for you in sujood. This man, who many would consider misguided, he made dua for him in every salah in sujood. So he didn't just cast people outside the fold of Islam. He wasn't exclusionary. His dawah was to everybody. The prince, the merchant, the sheikh, it didn't matter. Number 3, he didn't hide anything of Islam. He didn't hide the knowledge. He didn't hide the dawah. If he saw something wrong, he changed it. The dawah needs to be open to everybody, the entire cosmos. If CIA or FBI needs to walk in, we can't change what we have to say. We need to give them the proper dawah, even if they hate it. Islam is not a cult where we hide certain things and you only get it after you study for 50 years. No, it's open for everybody. And that is part of the reason why he became so successful. He refused to bend his dawah. Number 4, this ties back to the beginning of the dars, his refusal to backbite. So some people would come to him and they would ask him about dead people who were misguided. Maybe a big Sufi sheikh died that people used to worship, and they would ask him, what do you think about this guy? And he refused to talk about them, even if they were misguided. And one of the wisdoms behind this is, if you lash out at a dead person, those who are worshiping him, who remember him fondly, they're going to reject your dawah and they're going to go harder in their kufr. So he took his wisdom and he refused to do that. The living of the misguided people, he refuted. He refuted the living people who were misguided. But the dead, he let the dead be. He would refute specific misguided concepts, but he wouldn't refute the dead themselves. Number 5, he called people to the structured aqeedah. Aqeedah structured in a method, in steps. He prioritized certain things in aqeedah. If one sins and he goes to Allah, he can be forgiven. But if one has a problem in their la ilaha illallah, in their aqeedah, in their tawheed, and then they show up on qiyamah, there's going to be no hope for them. And so he set his priority. Smaller innovations are wrong, but that's not what Ibn Abdul-Wahab focused on. Like Mawlid. You know what Mawlid is? It's a birthday. Some people, they do the birthday of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's wrong. It's a bid'ah. It's an innovation. But that's not what Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab focused on. He started with the more important things. If we saw somebody committing kufr, then he focused on kufr first. He's not going to say, okay, I know you're basically not a Muslim, but stop celebrating the birthday. Some people do this nowadays. No, he was structured. He went from A to Z. He started going to those who were misguided into kufr, and then those who worship graves, and then those that had lesser deviances. And then he would go to the smaller innovations, like you need to grow your beard, or don't celebrate Mawlid. If somebody is making kufr, you don't go up to them and harass them about their beard length or that they have piercing. You first fix their Islam so they can be a Muslim, and then you worry about these other things. Number 6, he wanted people to take aqeedah in its entirety. Not a bit of aqeedah and forget another bit. What do we mean by this? Aqeedah is not just uluhiyah and ubudiyah and asma wa sifat and rububiyyah, right? If you read usool al-thalatha, you know what this is. It's not very complex, don't worry. It's not just knowing that Allah is your Lord, knowing that you only worship Allah, and knowing Allah's names and attributes. That's not all that Tawheed is. If you have the proper Tawheed, then accompanied with it is worshipping Allah at night. Accompanied with it is proper adab. He taught them Tawheed, Rububiyyah, Uluhiyyah, Asma wa Sifat. But he also taught them adab. And he taught them to worship Allah. One who has right aqeedah, but his adab are bad, his manners are bad, his aqeedah has a problem. Because if he had severe, firm conviction in Allah, he wouldn't be able to justify these simple things, doing them with such a blatant incorrectness. So, that's one of the wisdoms why we discussed adab so much in our first class. We gave an introduction to the book. We discussed adab so much. And then you went home and you learned the basics of aqeedah. Just the fundamental basics. And now we're learning who the author is. 7. He wanted people to follow the sunnah. He taught them to do what Muhammad ﷺ did. And when he did that, he raised a successful generation of mujaddideen, people who revived Islam and who were successful. Some people wrote over 100 books on Mawlid. 100 books refuting the birthday of Muhammad ﷺ, refuting celebrating it. Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab refuted it in 2 lines. Did Muhammad ﷺ do it? No. So why should we do it? Khalas, refuted. There's no reason to do what Muhammad ﷺ didn't do. And for example, the 15 days of Sha'ban, the 15th day of Sha'ban, there's an inauthentic narration where it says that Allah comes down on the night of the 15th day of Sha'ban. First of all, people don't even know what the night of the 15th day of Sha'ban is. They celebrate it on the 16th. They think that the 15th day includes up until midnight, when actually it starts at Maghrib. So they're celebrating on the wrong day anyways, and it's a bid'ah. Anyways, the hadith says Allah comes down on that night. The hadith doesn't even say to worship on that night, but yet people do it. Aisha radiallahu anha said that one who talks too much, then the talk will be forgotten. If you're blathering on and on and on and on and on about something tiny and unimportant, people are going to forget it and they're going to end up being confused. If you give somebody 100 books on Mawlid, in the end they're going to be like, I don't even know. And I don't care, to be honest. That's why it was simple. Muhammad ﷺ didn't worship extra on the 15th day of Sha'ban. We don't do it. Khalas. Ibn Abdul-Wahab also refuted major deviants who are a large danger. He didn't go around refuting people who had a couple of mistakes and then go around backbiting and spending his time on it. He didn't go and say, okay, that guy, he didn't wear black when he gives or he didn't wear white when he gives the khutbah. And then he'd go around refuting him to everybody while you've got across the street masajid who are doing things that are straight up bid'ah or kufr. He didn't do that. He focused on things that were relevant and important. And to reiterate, he didn't bring anything new. He didn't issue his own statements. Qur'an, Sunnah, scholars, and sometimes rephrasing. This was so much so that some ulama said Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab was ignorant. Because they said, how can somebody with knowledge, all he does is Qur'an and hadith and statements of the ulama? He was so strict that some ulama called him ignorant. But he wasn't ignorant, of course. His books are so simple. If you just look at Kitab al-Tawheed, sometimes he would quote scholars. Usually it's Qur'an and Sunnah, and sometimes he would quote scholars. And you'll see this in usool al-Thalatha. He quotes Shafi'i and Bukhari on the 2nd page. And he really loved Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, al-Dahabi rahimahullah, Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahimahullah. And he never quoted himself. He would never quote himself in any book. So if he is misguided, then all of our ulama have to be misguided before him. And he always gave proofs. So if he is misguided, then all people need to do is refute the proofs. They just have to refute the Qur'an and the hadith. No problem. But the issue is they can't do that. So they have to get a hadith and twist them and say he's from this town. Allahu musta'an. Everybody needs to know aqeedah. Whether you're a garbage man or a professor of physics, whether you're an alim or a Bedouin, whether you're Furqan or Ilyas, you need to know your aqeedah. It's important. And it will benefit you in this life and the next. But we'll discuss that later on. And after his life, his dawah spread even further. So nowadays, some people claim to call to the Khilafah. These people are as far away from the Khilafah as the sky is to the sun, but they claim to call to the Khilafah. And they slander Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab. And they say he rebelled against the Uthmani Khilafah. And we know the Khilafah is the Muslim government. But in their same books, they praise Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, who is an Ash'ari Sufi. They praise Salahuddin. But what did Salahuddin do? He didn't do what the Abbasid Khilafah wanted him to do. Neither of them rebelled, but both of them disobeyed them. And they didn't go according to their rule. Salahuddin gathered his forces and rejected what they wanted him to do. And he went and he killed the Shia and he killed the Crusaders and he got Al-Quds, Dar es-Salam, Jerusalem. And the same with Nuruddin Zinki. Nuruddin and Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab are similar. They didn't do what the Khilafah wanted because the Khilafah was corrupt and weak and crumbling. And they gathered their forces and they established Islam. They praised Nuruddin and they praised Salahuddin, but they slandered Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab, even though they did the same thing. The Uthmani Khilafah was on the verge of collapse, and it had so much shirk. And Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab, for most of his life, wasn't even in an area controlled by the Khilafah. So how are you going to rebel against the Khilafah if you're not even in an area where you can fight with them? It doesn't make any sense. And then, an even more ignorant statement is they say he hates the four Imams of fiqh. Abu Hanifa, Malik, Shafi'i, and Ahmad ibn Hanbal. They claim he hates the four Imams. We're going to talk about fiqh later on, maybe Dars 5 or 6. We're going to talk about fiqh a lot. Maybe 3 or 4 durus just as an introduction to fiqh. But the truth of the matter is, if you look at the students of Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab, those that look directly from him, they stuck firmly with the four Imams. His son, Abdullah ibn Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab ibn Sulayman, he said, they asked him a question about Hajj. And there was a Sahih hadith about this question, right? And this Sahih hadith contradicted all four Imams. So did he take the hadith or did he go with the Imams? He said, no, we have to go with the Imams. We have to do what the Salaf did. How could they not know about this question in Hajj? So he rejected a Sahih hadith just to follow the four Imams.
So he's wrong.
No. The reason why is because the four Imams, the hadith are not the only way. We're going to talk about this in fiqh. Hadith are not the only way to uncover Sunnah. What if the Sahaba did something, but they never did a hadith about it? You know that they did it because of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? So, if Imam Malik was in an area of people that learn from the Sahaba, but he doesn't have a hadith, what are you going to do? Are you going to do one single hadith that contradicts what all of the Sahaba did? Or are you going to do what all of the Sahaba did who followed Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? You're going to do what all of the Sahaba did. That makes more sense. But we'll discuss that more in fiqh. So he stuck with the four Imams over this Sahih hadith. And the same thing about Khatam al-Qur'an. You know, after you finish the Qur'an, you make the dua. Some ulama said this is a bid'ah. But Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab said we cannot contradict the four Imams. And in fact, he himself followed the Hanbali madhab. But the thing you need to know is, he wasn't a blind follower. If there was another proof, a strong proof, hadith or otherwise, he would follow the proof. He didn't follow the madhab blindly, but he did follow a madhab. So, as years went on after the death of Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab, they lost their stronghold. And the first generation of Saud and their children fell apart. So, when we look at when Muhammad ﷺ sent people out for the first hijrah to Abyssinia, Habasha, he sent the Sahaba. He asked Ja'far a question about the Negus, Ashama, or no, Ashama was later, about the leader of Abyssinia. He asked, was the Negus descended from other kings? Why? Why did he ask Ja'far radiallahu anhu this? The reason why is because the hadith says a king who is descended from other kings will be seeking an empire or a kingdom in the past. Let's say your father was a king and your grandfather was a king. And your grandfather, his kingdom was big, but yours is smaller. You're going to be chasing after what your grandfather had in terms of conquest. And we see the same thing happening at the time of Al-Saud and Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab at their death. Abdul Aziz al-Saud came in the earliest part of the 20th century, chasing after, or the 19th century, chasing after a kingdom that was lost in the past. Because we talk about how the kingdom of Saud and Wahhab declined. So he got the Mujahideen, the sincere, honest soldiers of Allah, and he told them expand. And these were sincere Mujahideen, and they fought. And he spread his state on the blood of the sincere Mujahideen. However, Al-Saud now and before him are traitors. It's in their blood to be a traitor. That's just what they are. Al-Saud Abdul Aziz, he sent in the early part of the century, or Faisal in the earlier part of the 20th century, he went to Britain to establish ties with the kuffar just to gain power for no legitimate reason. And we'll discuss allegiance with the kuffar later. And he was using the Mujahideen, spilling their blood, letting them die to expand the area for his own selfish interests. These were sincere men, shuhada, martyrs, inshallah. But eventually some of the Mujahideen saw corruptness. Why is he allying with the British? So, a bit of a rift started to happen. So eventually they expand to the borders of what's now Saudi Arabia. And they're told to stop. They see some Shia at the border, so people are like Shia. And they say, we need to go to the Shia and we need to either give them dawah or we need to kick them out. Because they're disbelievers and they're spreading mischief. But Saud told them no. Once you got to the borders of what's nowadays Saudi, the British told them stop. This is all we're giving you. So he obeyed the British for no real good reason, just for power and for selfish desire. And he made the Mujahideen stop even though it's unjust. But the Mujahideen, they said no. The Sharia of Allah is the only justice and it needs to be spread across every nation on this earth. And somebody who hated the Mujahideen, an author wrote about them and he said they were as sincere as they could be. They only wanted two things: victory on the battlefield or victory in Shahada. That's all they wanted. And so he told them, stop, don't expand anymore. The British told us to stop, so stop. But they were Bedouins. They were simple people. And they didn't know about the modern technologies. So Saud told them, they have airplanes. The British have airplanes that bomb them. They didn't know what an airplane was even. They asked, what's an airplane? So Saud told them, it's this big thing that flies in the sky above your head. So the sincere Mujahideen, the people that Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab raised, his descendants, they asked him, these planes that fly up, let me ask you a question. Is Allah above these planes or below these planes? Allah is above the planes. So they said, don't worry about it. Allah is above the planes. We trust in Allah. And it was Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab who raised his generation of sincere mujaddideen and mujahideen and dua. And so telling them to stop at the borders caused a big rift between Saud and the Mujahideen. And his children, such as Faisal, who everybody, they see the speech of Faisal where he says he's going to pray in Masjid al-Aqsa. He is a liar and a traitor. he was going and slaughtering the mujahideen left and right because they refused to bow to the kuffar like he bowed to the kuffar. And the ones who will bring victory to La ilaha illallah are going to be the descendants of Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab, because his descendants are the inheritors of the Anbiya. The scholars are the inheritors of the prophets. And all he did was bridge the gap of generations, bringing Qur'an and Sunnah to us. That's all he did. And yet, his sincerity, now his book is taught everywhere in the world, and for the last hour or so, he's been getting a reward for every single second that we've been sitting here. He's sitting in his grave, people are backbiting him, giving him all his deeds. Think about his reward on the Day of Judgment. And his books are a danger to the West. They're a danger to America, to be honest. Because they build people who are sincere, who understand their beliefs, and who understand that we cannot accept oppression. And they understand that the kuffar will never be happy with those who do justice. Those who are with shaitan and who love injustice will never be pleased with one who has firm monotheism in his heart and who only wishes to spread justice in the lands. So now we're going to talk about what is a Wahhabi. This is the last thing. You hear this term Wahhabi, left and right. What is a Wahhabi? 99% of the people, or 90% who talk about a Wahhabi don't have a faintest idea what a Wahhabi is. They just say the word because they've heard it. And they associate it with extremism, right? That's essentially what Wahhabism is associated with, and the Arabian Peninsula. However, they don't really know where the word came from, what it means. They don't know what Wahhab is, and they don't know who Ibn Abdul-Wahab is. Now we know who Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab is, and we know there's nothing bad for us to go and say, you know, Wahhabi is bad. If being a Wahhabi means being like him, then I'm going to be the first person to tell you I'm a Wahhabi. But the thing about it is, everybody who they call a Wahhabi, they don't call themselves Wahhabi. The only people that call other people Wahhabi are people who are trying to insult people. So what's Wahhab? Aslan, originally, what's Wahhab? Wahhab is one of the 99 names of Allah. So, when they say Wahhab in a negative way, they're using one of the names of Allah as a slander and to backbite people. Imagine if somebody was kind of a pushover, and we said, oh, he's such a Rahimi, he's such a Rahmani. How offensive would that be? Some people would make kufr on you, they would make takfir on you. You're making fun of a name of Allah, you're saying the name of Allah has a bad meaning. So it shows you, anybody who says Wahhabi is an ignoramus. They have no idea of what the most basic fundamentals of Islam. It is one of the names of Allah, al-Wahhab. That's the first thing. Because Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab, Muhammad the son of the servant of al-Wahhab. Same way we have Abdul Rahman, Abdul Rahim, Abdullah. It's just a variation. So, we know what Wahhab is and we know what Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab is. So where did this term Wahhabi come from? This term came from the British, because we talked about the Mujahideen, who they refused to bow to the British. So they made this word Wahhabi so that the Muslims can get misguided and start saying, oh, that guy's a Wahhabi. And they get misguided from the teachings of Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab. The same teachings that the British are afraid of because it made Islam rise over them. Now they made the term Wahhabi, so the Muslims are afraid of it. So anyone who says Wahhabi is being brainwashed by the non-Muslims in order to be defeated by them. It's that simple. They have been brainwashed to be defeated. They're intellectually colonialized. That's it. They've never read a book of Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab. They have never studied his life. They don't even know what the word Wahhab means. So, we don't refer to ourselves as Wahhabis. But we follow Muhammad ibn Abdul-Wahab because he was righteous. And he has proof for every single one of his rulings. And he brought nothing on his own. Tonight, or for the week, your homework is to memorize the first half of the first page of usool al-thalatha. And memorize. It's very easy. It's very easy, very short. And to read 5 pages of the explanation of Uthaymeens, less than a page of a day, and the short pages. And if you didn't read usool al-thalatha yet, 22 pages, just read it quickly. You can read it tonight, 30 minutes. Alright, so tonight, or for the week, your homework is to memorize the first half of the first page of usool al-thalatha. And memorize. It's very easy. It's very easy. Very short. And to read 5 pages of the explanation of Uthaymeens, less than a page of a day, and the short pages. And if you didn't read usool al-thalatha yet, I think you read it, Zakaria, Furqan, finish it. 22 pages, just read it quickly. You can read it tonight, 30 minutes, no problem. And go over your notes, inshallah. So, the first page, what I want you to memorize is Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. اعلم رحمك الله أن يجب علينا تعلم 4 مسائل. الأولى العلم وهو معرفة الله ومعرفة الدين ومعرفة نبيه صلى الله عليه وسلم ومعرفة دينه الإسلامي بالدلة. الثانية العمل به. الثالثة الدعوة عليه. الرابعة الصبر في عطافه. You don't have to do الرابعة. All that is Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. No, may Allah have mercy upon you, that it is obligatory for us to learn 4 principles. The first, knowledge. And knowledge is knowledge of Allah, knowledge of His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and knowledge of His religion with proof. The second, acting upon it. The third, dawah to it. That's it. That's all you have to remember. It's about 20 seconds or like 15 to 20 seconds. It's very easy. Just go over it once a day and you'll have it memorized. It's only 12 seconds. And I think everybody can read Arabic, but if you need me to transliterate it, I can do that for you, inshallah. أقول قولي هذا أستغفر لي ولكم فاستغفروه فإنه هو الغفور الرحيم. سبحانك وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله لا شريك له استغفروه ونتوب عليك.